Welcome back. Now, the South African Post Office continues to be in a dire financial state, and the public entity has been making losses with a reported 2.3 billion rand loss in revenue for 2021. Now, SAPO incurred a sum of 198 million rand in fruitless and wasteful expenditure for the year 2019-2020. And last year, the South African Post Office asked for a bailout of 8 billion rand, but the National Treasury declined. Department of Communications and Digital Technologies Deputy Minister Philemon Mapulane joins us now virtually to talk about the challenges faced by the South African Post Office and whether there is any hope of rescuing the South African Post Office. Mr. Mapulane, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much, Sakina, and thanks for having me.
Ms. Mapulane, your department in November told Scopa that the South African Post Office had been experiencing grave liquidity problems and its core revenue continues to decline. But this has been going on for quite some time, and it's been consecutive years of a downward spiral. And now the South African Post Office is said to be technically insolvent. What is actually going on? If you were to explain to ordinary South Africans in layman's terms, what is the actual problem with the post office?
Thank you very much, Sakina. Maybe let me just give a historical context of the performance of the post office. So when the post office was established some years back, the traditional dominant role has been the delivery and collection of letter post. And so that has been its traditional role over the years. And subsequently, technological advancement had a big impact on the post office. The introduction of the era of the internet, the delivery of mail through emails and so forth, has had an impact on the post office. And so the post office has not really recovered and adapted to the changed market condition ever since. My apologies. When you look at the financial performance of the post office, you will realize that it started to decline. Revenue started to decline around 2013. And ever since, the post office has not really tried and managed to turn itself around. It has been experiencing serious revenue decline from 2013 up to now. Of course, there were some missed opportunities that could have been used to turn the post office around, particularly after it was placed under administration in 2015. It was unable to turn itself around. It continued to experience bleeding of revenue up to where we are now. And so when we came in, myself and the minister, we met with the board and were presented with this bleak picture. We requested that the post office must reimagine its future, must develop a new strategy. And so we'll be able to, my apologies, Sakina, I'm just coming out of a terrible flu. And so we requested the post office to develop this new strategy, building the post office of tomorrow. And through this strategy, we hope that we will reposition SAPO and change it from being a traditional letter post delivery organization to providing a wide and expansive services. So the post office of tomorrow has been developed by the post office, has been presented to us, we've discussed it, we've approved it. And so we are ready to assist the organization to turn itself around. If I may just speak briefly to the post office of tomorrow, is anchored on about 4 key pillars. And the first pillar is on logistics and warehousing hub. We would like the post office to focus on being the logistic hub, providing e-commerce to the industry. And secondly, we want the post office in this era of digital identity to digitize itself so that it can be able to provide the authentic authentication services through establishing a national trust center. We also would like to utilize the expansive network of the postal services, the branches of the post office, to reposition the post office to become a business hub. And lastly, Sakina, the new strategy aims to create and forge partnerships with other organizations, utilizing its expansive network, because there are other areas which cannot be accessed by the other market players, which can be accessed by the post office through its network. So through this strategy, we hope that we will turn around the post office. Of course, we will require financial injection. And in this regard, we are in discussion with the National Treasury. The minister has had a meeting with the Minister of Finance. It has been followed up by the officials who have been requested to make some submissions, which we are in the process of doing that. So yes, indeed, we are committed to turning around the post office, to providing this variety of services that I've just spoken to. Of course, okay, Sakina.
Deputy Minister, if I may, so you talk about an entity, a South African post office that is bleeding, and yet this very entity that is bleeding, we've seen numerous reports, including the AG's reports about fruitless and wasteful expenditure, including reports of ghost workers by some of the unions. So those are serious own goals to be scoring for an entity that is bleeding.
Yes, Sakina, of course, we have appeared before the SCOPA. Last year, in fact, we appeared twice. Indeed, we have acknowledged that for the post office to reposition itself, it has to focus on operational efficiency. We have to do away with the fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We have to do away with the issues that are raised by the Auditor General. So we have admitted that that is an area that we need to focus on. And so we have instructed the post office to ensure that there is consequence management. They have established a committee called the Financial Misconduct Committee that looks into all instances of irregular expenditure and proposes to management what are the consequence management to be undertaken. So yes, we are worried about that. It is not only SCOPA ourselves. When we came in, we said, no, there has to be consequences for this irregular expenditure that we continue to experience.
So when did you put these measures in place for consequence management, Deputy Minister?
Well, when we met with them, I think around November last year, when we requested a report of all the irregular expenditure, we were not satisfied with the explanation that we were receiving. And so we insisted that there must be consequence management. And indeed, the Financial Misconduct Committee has been reconstituted in line with the directives that we gave them. And it is operating. We've received a report about 2 weeks back on the progress that they are making to ensure that there is consequence management.
It's 6 months later. Has anybody been held accountable?
A number of officials have been held accountable. Some of them have left the organization. And some of the reports are, of course, being processed to our attention. And the Auditor General also has raised some other queries which we had to deal with in the annual general meeting about 3 or 4 weeks back. So we are dealing with all these matters that keep on being raised. And of course, we need to emphasize for the post office to regain the confidence of the South African public, it has to have its house in order. It must ensure that management is focused on the key areas that they've identified, make sure that there is no irregular expenditure, because we get worried when there is irregular expenditure in the midst of all these challenges that we are faced with. So it is our concern. We're working with them. We want to turn around the post office. We don't want to continue to experience all the adverse audit outcomes that we are now experiencing as the post office. But of course, Sakina, we should also have historical perspective of how we got to be here as the South African Post Office.
Okay.
And
so speaking to that, Deputy Minister, you talk about this current turnaround strategy that's called the Post Office of Tomorrow. You spoke about focusing on things like digitization, logistics, and diversified, expanded services. But other than the new name, if you go back and you look at what the post office has been doing, these proposals that you have for this post office of tomorrow, they've been in the pipeline for quite some time. This is what SAPO has been planning, even under the previous CEO, Mark Barnes. He also spoke of these strategies. So when you are now reviewing SAPO's previous documents, what have you identified as the stumbling blocks to implementation for those strategies? Because during the budget vote, you yourself mentioned these things again in saying that the post office is being positioned to become digital hubs, as you just mentioned. You mentioned these things in Parliament, but it was also mentioned in Parliament that you have failed as the post office to even capitalize on something like parcel deliveries. So let's talk about this. What are the stumbling blocks, Deputy Minister?
Well, Sakina, we are the first to admit that over the years, I think there has been some missed opportunity, particularly after the post office was placed under the administration in 2014, 2015, where subsequently the post office was recapitalized and we missed on that opportunity. I think we focused on things that we should not have focused on as the post office. You remember that there was a period when the post office had to move out of its own properties, move into the malls and other places which turned out to be very expensive to maintain. If you look at the three biggest cost drivers of the post office, property is one of those cost drivers, which means that we should not have moved out of our offices, out of our own properties. We should have utilized the injection that we received from the state in order to refurbish and to prepare this properties because it's owned by the post office. There was no need for us to move out of those. So these are some of the things that we pick up as we move along. And we have, together with the minister, directed that we need to go back to our offices. Of course, some of them are not in a good state as we speak. Has to be refurbished. We must move back to our own offices. We must focus on these key objectives that we have identified for ourselves. But you know, there is an issue which is now being contested by the private market players of the sub 1 kilogram.
Yes.
Because that is a reserve that is in per legislation, that the post office has got exclusive reserve to deliver those parcels. And so we are being contested in court. The matter is in court. And so we are engaging with other government departments as the post office. There's been several engagements where we want to secure the services of other government departments so that we can leverage on this legal provision that is there in the Constitution for the...
Deputy Minister, we are unfortunately out of time, but I have to quickly ask you, there was a security breach that took place between the 16th of November and the 28th of, 16th and 28th of October, rather, last year. And we spoke about it here on the show a while back, where 89 million rand was stolen, allegedly, by workers of Postbank and contractors. Do you have an update for us on that? What is practically going to change so that these sort of things don't happen anymore?
Well, that is in relation to the Postbank. We haven't received an updated report as yet. We are aware of that incident that happened, and the reports that we have received, the initial report suggests that there was no outside interference. So we have directed the board of the Post Bank to go and investigate this and to give us a report, because we cannot be comfortable with that kind of a situation. We think there is more than what is been reported, so we have asked them to go and investigate. We have not received the report as yet.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning. Department of Communication and Digital Technologies Deputy Minister Philemon Mapulane discussing the South African Post Office's financial downward spiral and whether it is possible to save the South African Post Office from a total collapse.